The rain hammered against the windows of Sarah's third-floor apartment like desperate fingers clawing for entry. She had lived alone in this converted Victorian house for 8 months now, ever since the divorce papers were finalized. The creaking floors and settling walls had become her only companions in the silence that stretched endlessly through each night. Sarah Martinez, 36 years old with short curly black hair that framed her olive-skinned face, pulled her oversized gray sweater tighter around her petite frame. The silver hoop earrings her grandmother had given her caught the dim lamplight as she moved through her living room, checking the locks for the third time that evening. It was 11:47 p.m. when she first heard it. A soft thudding sound from somewhere deep within the walls, rhythmic and deliberate. Like footsteps, but muffled, as if someone was walking through the apartment below hers. But Mrs. Chen, her elderly neighbor, had left for her daughter's house in Portland 3 days ago. Sarah pressed her ear against the hardwood floor, her heart rate quickening. The sound stopped immediately, as if whatever was making it knew she was listening. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, pregnant with an anticipation that made her skin crawl. She straightened up, laughing nervously at herself. "Old building," she whispered to the empty room. "Just old building noises." But deep down, in the primitive part of her brain that had kept her ancestors alive in darker times, something screamed that she was no longer alone. The thudding began again, closer this time. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as the sound moved through the walls like a living thing, following the path from her living room toward the kitchen. She grabbed her phone with trembling fingers, the screen's blue glow casting eerie shadows across her face. No missed calls, no messages. The outside world continued its normal rhythm while her reality twisted into something unrecognizable. The footsteps, she could no longer deny what they were, stopped directly beneath her kitchen. Sarah crept toward the sound, her bare feet silent against the cold floor. Each step felt like a betrayal, bringing her closer to something her rational mind couldn't accept. She knelt beside the kitchen island, placing both palms flat against the floor. The wood felt different here, somehow warmer, as if something with body heat was pressed against it from below. Her silver earrings swayed gently as she leaned closer, straining to hear. "Hello?" she called out, her voice barely above a whisper. The response was immediate and terrifying. 3 deliberate knocks echoed up through the floorboards, perfectly timed with her heartbeat. Knock, knock, knock. Sarah scrambled backward, her hip hitting the counter hard enough to send a ceramic mug crashing to the floor. The sound of shattering porcelain seemed obscenely loud in the suffocating quiet that followed. She waited, counting her rapid breaths. 1 minute, 2, 5. Nothing. But as she reached for the broken pieces, she noticed something that made her blood turn to ice. Wet footprints led from where she had been kneeling to the kitchen door. Footprints that weren't hers, appearing as if someone invisible had just walked through her apartment. The footprints glistened under the fluorescent kitchen light, each one perfectly formed and dripping with what looked like water. But there was something wrong with the shape. The prints were too long, too narrow, with what appeared to be extra indentations where toes should be. Sarah's hands shook as she reached for the paper towels, her breathing shallow and rapid. When she looked back, the prints were gone, leaving only dry hardwood behind. She rubbed her eyes hard enough to see stars, wondering if exhaustion was finally claiming her sanity. The building's old radiator clanked to life somewhere in the walls, a sound she had grown accustomed to over the months. But tonight, the metallic groaning seemed to form patterns, almost like Morse code tapping out a message she couldn't understand. She retreated to her bedroom, locking the door behind her, a useless gesture in her own apartment, but one that provided a thin veneer of security. The queen-size bed that had once felt too big now seemed like an island of safety in an ocean of uncertainty. Sarah pulled her laptop onto the mattress and typed unexplained sounds in apartment into the search bar. The results were a mixture of plumbing issues, settling foundations, and paranormal forums that she dismissed immediately. She wasn't that person. She was rational, educated, grounded in reality. A soft scratching sound began inside the wall behind her headboard. The noise was methodical, like fingernails dragging across wood in deliberate patterns. Sarah pressed her back against the opposite wall, watching in horror as tiny flakes of paint began to fall from where the scratching was most intense. Then she heard something that stopped her heart completely. Her own voice, muffled but unmistakable, coming from inside the wall. "Hello? Is someone there?" Sarah's blood turned to ice as her own words echoed back from within the wall, distorted but recognizably hers. The voice repeated everything she had said throughout the evening, played back in fragments like a broken recording. "Old building. Just old building noises," the wall whispered in her voice. She pressed herself harder against the opposite wall, her silver earrings catching the lamplight as she shook her head in denial. This wasn't possible. There had to be an explanation. Sound carries strangely in old buildings, echoes bounce in unexpected ways. But then the voice began saying things she had never spoken aloud. "I know you're listening," it said in her exact tone and inflection. "I've been waiting so long for you to hear me." Sarah's laptop slipped from her numb fingers, clattering to the floor. The scratching sounds intensified, moving along the wall like something large was dragging itself through the space between the drywall and the exterior brick. She fumbled for her phone and dialed 911, but when the operator answered, no sound came from her throat. The terror had literally stolen her voice, leaving her gasping like a fish out of water. "911, what's your emergency?" the operator repeated. Sarah finally managed to croak out her address and a plea for help, but even as she spoke, she realized how insane she would sound. The voice from the wall had gone silent the moment she started the call, as if it knew. "Ma'am, are you still there? Can you describe the nature of your emergency?" How could she explain that her own voice was speaking to her from inside the walls, that something was mimicking her words, learning from them, becoming her? The call ended when her phone battery died, plunging the room into darkness save for the streetlight filtering through her curtains. In the darkness, the scratching resumed, but now it was coming from multiple walls at once. In the suffocating darkness, Sarah could hear the scratching multiply, spreading like an infection through every wall of her apartment. The sounds moved with purpose, creating a symphony of terror that seemed to circle her room like predators closing in on wounded prey. She fumbled for the lamp switch, her fingers clumsy with panic. When the light flickered on, she saw them, dozens of thin cracks spiderwebbing across her bedroom walls, as if something was pushing against them from the inside with tremendous force. The temperature in the room plummeted so suddenly that her breath began to mist. Sarah grabbed her heavy winter coat from the closet, wrapping it around her gray sweater, but the cold seemed to seep into her bones, regardless of layers. "What do you want?" she whispered to the walls, immediately regretting giving voice to her terror. The response came not from within the walls this time, but from her own mouth. She felt her lips moving against her will, forming words in her voice that she wasn't thinking or speaking. "I want to be you," her own mouth said, while her mind screamed in horror. Sarah clapped both hands over her mouth, but the voice continued, muffled but clear. "I've been watching you, learning you, becoming you. Soon, I'll be the only Sarah anyone remembers." She ran to the bathroom and stared at her reflection in the mirror. Her face looked normal. Olive skin, dark curly hair, silver earrings catching the harsh fluorescent light. But her eyes held an expression she didn't remember making, a smile she wasn't feeling. In the mirror, she watched her reflection mouth the words, "You can't stop what's already begun." But Sarah's real mouth never moved. She shattered the mirror with her fist, sending glass cascading into the sink. Blood welled from her knuckles, but the pain felt distant, unreal. Behind her, she heard her own laughter echoing from every room of the apartment. Sarah's blood dripped steadily into the sink as she wrapped her injured hand in a towel, but the pain barely registered above the sound of her own laughter bouncing off the walls. The sound was wrong, too high, too sharp, filled with malice she had never felt. She stumbled back into the bedroom, where the cracks in the walls had widened into actual gaps. Through these openings, she could see movement in the darkness beyond, shadows that moved with human-like fluidity but wrong proportions. The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by whispers in her voice coming from every direction at once. "Do you remember when you were 7, Sarah?" the voices asked. "When you fell down the well behind your grandmother's house?" Sarah's breath caught. She had never told anyone about that childhood incident, not her parents, not her ex-husband, not even her therapist. She had convinced herself it was just a nightmare, a trauma-induced false memory. "You were down there for 3 hours," the voices continued. "In the dark, in the cold, with me." The memories came flooding back with crystalline clarity. The sensation of falling, the impact against wet stone, the absolute darkness that seemed to press against her skin like living fabric. And something else down there in the depths, something that had whispered to her, comforted her, promised to always be with her. "I kept you company," her own voice said from the walls. "I kept you warm. I kept you alive. And when they pulled you up, you brought me with you." Sarah shook her head violently, her earrings catching in her curly hair. "No, you're not real. Your stress, your exhaustion, I'm the part of you that fell and never came back up," the voice interrupted. "I've been growing stronger, waiting for you to be alone enough, scared enough, broken enough to let me out completely." The gaps in the walls began to widen, and Sarah realized with mounting horror that something was about to emerge from within them. The walls began to buckle outward as something large pressed against them from within. Sarah backed toward the bedroom door, her injured hand leaving bloody smears on the doorframe as the entire apartment seemed to pulse like a living heart. Plaster dust rained down from the ceiling as the scratching sounds became thunderous scraping, like massive claws raking against wood and metal. The cracks spread across every surface, walls, ceiling, even the floor beneath her feet, creating a web of destruction that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. "You can't run from yourself, Sarah," her voice called from everywhere at once. "I am you, the you that fell into darkness and learned to love it." Sarah's reflection began appearing in every reflective surface, the black window glass, the screen of her dead laptop, even the polished doorknob. But each reflection moved independently, grinning while she screamed, waving while she stood frozen in terror. The temperature continued to drop until ice crystals formed on her breath. Her fingers, still wrapped in the bloody towel, began to go numb despite her heavy coat. The cold wasn't just physical. It was the deep, bone-penetrating chill of absolute loneliness, the kind that had lived in her chest since the divorce, since the years of failed relationships, since that moment as a child when she realized she would always be fundamentally alone. "Let me out," the voice pleaded, and for the first time it sounded genuinely desperate rather than menacing. "Let me be real. Let me live in the light, instead of hiding in the shadows of your mind." One of the walls finally gave way with a thunderous crack, revealing not another apartment or the building's interior, but an endless darkness that seemed to swallow light itself. From within that void, Sarah could see a figure slowly emerging. Herself, but wrong, with eyes like black wells and a smile too wide for any human face. The other Sarah stepped into the room, leaving wet footprints identical to those she had seen in the kitchen, and extended one pale hand toward her. The other Sarah stood in the ruined bedroom, her identical face wearing an expression of profound sadness, mixed with something hungry and ancient. She was perfect in every detail. The same curly black hair, the same olive skin, even wearing the same gray sweater and silver hoop earrings. But her eyes held depths that belonged to the bottom of wells and the spaces between walls. "You don't have to be alone anymore," the duplicate said, her voice exactly matching Sarah's, but carrying harmonics that made the remaining glass in the room vibrate. "We can share this life. We can be whole." Sarah pressed herself against the door, feeling the wood splinter under the pressure of her fear. "You're not real. You're just trauma. Just my mind breaking down from isolation and stress." The other Sarah laughed, the sound like water echoing in a deep cavern. "Does it matter what I am if I'm here? If I can touch you?" She reached out with one pale finger and traced a line across Sarah's cheek. The touch was ice cold, but undeniably real. "I've been with you for 29 years, the duplicate continued. "Through every heartbreak, every disappointment, every night you lay awake wondering why you always end up alone. I understand that pain because I am that pain. Let me carry it for you." Sarah felt something inside her chest, a knot of loneliness she had carried for so long she had forgotten what it felt like to be without it, begin to loosen. The offer was tempting in a way that terrified her more than the supernatural horror of the situation. "All you have to do is close your eyes," the other Sarah whispered, moving closer until their faces were inches apart. "Just close your eyes and let me be you for a while. Rest. Let someone else carry the weight." Sarah's eyes began to flutter closed despite her terror. The exhaustion of years of solitude pressed down on her like a physical weight. But in that moment, she heard something that changed everything. The sound of sirens approaching, growing louder with each second. Someone had come for her after all.